Hello, everybody. I hope you're doing well. My name is Haley Salzman, and I'm a candidate for the Master of Arts in Leadership Development at Chapman University. In this presentation of my capstone project, I will share the key findings from the literature review, an overview of the deliverable, and a reflection of my journey in the MLD program. I would say my leadership journey bloomed in undergrad, where I found my passion for social justice and equity for underserved groups. As I navigated higher education spaces, I noticed an inequitable hierarchy of social justice issues on a college campus. I have continuously seen a significant lack of value for disability justice in education and a disinterest in funding those changes. As someone who identifies as physically disabled, that gap in education was and is harmful as I navigate higher education as a student and as a staff member. I've always struggled with leading in relation to professional success because I wasn't sure if someone with a body like mine could achieve that. This capstone journey and the people I met along the way reinforced my capabilities and the resiliency of disability. For my deliverable, I created a podcast called Crip Our Voices, where I connect with 4 fierce disabled women who have navigated higher education spaces and bodies that often exist in the margins. Through my research, specifically of Cardio 2010, I came to the conclusion that the commitment to barrier removal is essential to me. Qualitative research in the exploration of the narrative is a powerful tool that can foster liberation, empowerment, and systemic change. The resiliency, grace, and vulnerability my participants shared is the heart and soul of this project. The aim of this podcast series is to include the voices and perspectives of disabled students and scholars with pertinent data and experiences to discuss. By including all these diverse stakeholder perspectives, the podcast provides context and meaning to a silenced group that will offer depth and can lead to greater understanding and support of disabled students in higher education. Reviewing the literature led me to a further in-depth understanding of the relationship between disability and higher education. The bureaucratic systems of education are designed to offer disabled students the bare minimum and only offer permission to accommodations if they are required by law, which leaves disabled students feeling undervalued and undersupported. It is often difficult for disabled students to succeed in higher education for the reasons stated, and the thematic pattern of the research I examined illustrates the need for the uplifting of disabled storytelling, the dismantling of ableist campus culture, and the implementation of disability advocacy and activism in diversity and equity initiatives across post-secondary institutions, which were the themes of my literature review. Throughout the review of literature, I found that 34% of disabled students graduate from post-secondary education institutions compared to 59% of the national traditional undergraduate student population, according to the United States Department of Education. Disabled students are clearly not being supported in the ways that their non-disabled peers are, which leads to retention and graduation disparities. Disability scholar Linda Cardillo gathered narratives of disabled people in her research, and her findings show that there is a commonality and a connection between disabled students and isolation. The narrative experiences shared illustrate the power and richness of disability and the call for disabled voices to be heard. It should be implemented into the pedagogical framework of education to promote storytelling and shift societal perception of what it means to live with a disability. The miseducation stems from the cementation of systemic ableism. Through Cardillo's work, I learned that narrative and storytelling not only educates those who have perpetuated ableism, but it also leads to the empowerment of the storyteller as they are active agents in reconstructing and redefining their own and others' understanding of difference. I feel immense gratitude when reflecting on how this program, the MLD journey, has informed my perspective and has changed me and surprised me and influenced the way I look at the world. I learned a lot about my leadership styles, specifically about strategic social change leadership and servant leadership and their interconnectivity, and how I could use those leadership styles and frameworks to create systemic change and to help serve others. Beyond that, I learned that being a leader isn't one thing. You don't have to look a certain way or speak a certain way or have certain privileges to be a leader, although society teaches us that sometimes. When I began the MLD program, I knew I wanted to work in student affairs, or at least in a student serving, student facing role of some capacity. And when reflecting on this journey and the leader that I continue to aspire to be, I think about Rosemary Garland Thompson, who is a disability activist and writer. She writes a lot about her experiences in a disabled body and also the advocacy work and education she does on college campuses. I remember an article where she wrote about a speech or lecture she was giving at a college campus about access and about disability. And a graduate student approached her after the lecture had finished and thanked her. She thanked Rosemary Garland Thompson and said, "I now feel like I have a right to be in the world." Reading that article, I was actually an undergraduate student. I was a disability studies minor. And I remember it giving me chills and understanding that feeling so well, of feeling like you don't have the right to be in the world and you don't have the right to exist, or you feel guilty for that. And I think through this MLD experience, servant leadership and social change leadership gave me the language to articulate the leader that I want to be. I want to make sure that the students who I serve feel like they have a right to be in this space, feel like they have a right to be in the world, in the littlest, most mundane ways. I believe Crip Our Voices, the podcast for my deliverable, is an example of making space for folks to tell their stories and be authentically themselves and create change in those little mundane ways that at the end of the day matter so much. So to my fellow cohort mates, we did it. I'm so proud of all of us. To my accountability group, thank you for being my MLD family. Thank you for providing me with support and understanding and comic relief. I love you. To my editor, Joe Coluder, and my critical friend, Skylar Metter, y'all made this process so much easier, and I felt so supported. Thank you for that. And finally, to the folks that identify as neurodivergent, wheelchair users, amputees, deaf, blind, chronically ill, physically disabled, learning disabled, intellectually disabled, to the voices who've been silenced, to the bodies who exist in the margins, to a community that taught me the ethos of difference, the ethos of empathy, and the ethos of community, this is for you.